Like many people experiencing aphantasia, Catherine had never really thought that she was any different than anybody else. She feels she had gotten along just fine before realizing that she couldn't visualize, even getting a PhD and working in some pretty astute academic fields. But when she found out that other people could do this mental imagery thing, she was quite shocked, like many of you.
I'm not sure that I necessarily noticed that there was anything different in how I thought about things, especially as an adult. I didn't really think there was anything abnormal, right? I mean, I've gone through school, I've got a PhD, I've got a job, I do all sorts of stuff, and it never really occurred to me that was anything outside of the experience that other people have until I started sharing that experience with other people. Yeah, I mean, there was kind of nothing. Like the way that I've kind of described it in the past is like what's right in front of me is what I'm experiencing, and yeah, I can remember things, but usually it's verbal. So if somebody asks me a specific question, then I can recount an event for them. But if it's just me sitting on my couch thinking, I'd really like to think about that trip that my friend and I took, I can't really do that. It's not there. So I always kind of say things were sort of just blank.
Now, what was wild about Catherine's experience in the case study was that she started having small breakthroughs in perception very early on, and they consisted the whole way through all 4 sessions. Now, these types of novel thought processes weren't exactly visual per se at first. They were kind of spatial awareness, like getting an idea of a layout of a place in 3-dimensional space in her mind. She was absolutely not used to this amount of visual spatial processing. And it really raises a good question: what's the difference in the mind and how it's perceived between a spatial reasoning, a spatial processing, and a visual one? We're not totally sure. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. I suppose if you close your eyes and you kind of still get an idea of where your layout of your room is, maybe that's spatial. That doesn't have visual representation necessarily, but you know where things are at, versus actually cognitively processing the visual components of what you would see. I'm not sure, but that's the subtle difference, it seems like to me anyway, after 6 years of doing this. Then, as we kept up the exercises, she began to have these subtle, fleeting moments of visual information popping through in her thoughts. I remember the first moment like that was thinking of looking out her window. Take a look.
Let's ask this question. Was there any moment in doing that exercise there that stood out as more of like a sense of what it looks like than just simply describing it?
Probably thinking about looking out the window and thinking about like what the birds are doing out there and like what building I'm actually seeing out the window, and watching how the park changes. Yeah, I can kind of tell how that park is, or like the distance from my office and like how the building and the park kind of melt together.
And would you say, is this like, are we hitting territory that's kind of outside of your norm, your thought processes for the most part? Or is it something that you could look back on and be like, oh, well, I do that?
I don't think I really do that.
And what's wild about these moments with Catherine where visual information started popping through was that her conscious mind didn't seem to catch on to them fully. I've talked about this before, and it's a phenomenon that is very prevalent. And take a look at this moment from our post-sessions interview where she had forgotten completely about her very first breakthrough with the window.
I remember one of the first moments actually that you mentioned on the sessions too, where you had a visual impression. Do you remember it was with the window at your office?
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. But yeah, we did, I guess it was kind of the same thing where we went somewhere that I wasn't physically, but I'd been a lot and tried to describe it. And even now that we mentioned it, I can kind of get that same impression of my office window. Yeah, I also kind of get the feeling that color is a stronger impression for me. And looking out that window, it's very much like a set of, it's essentially a forest. And so you've got a whole lot of variation in the trees and the coloring in them. And that's the strongest piece for me, is the differing shades of green between the trees that are in that forest.
Now, this is extremely common, and like I said in previous videos, I believe that this is because the conscious mind has a hard time adjusting to a new experience, even when breakthroughs start to happen. So your default narrative of how you're used to thinking will sort of take over, not only erasing memories from the breakthroughs that you had, but also sometimes shutting off the ability entirely. And that's why it's so important that if you're going to start training this stuff, Write down any tiny difference that you experience. Otherwise, it's just going to pop out of your conscious mind and you're going to lose it forever. Here's some more moments where novel visual thoughts started to kick in for her.
Were there any moments where you started to get a sense of, like mentally, more of a sense of when you were standing out there observing the scene still?
The color on the flowering cherry might have been a 1 or 2, where like I could kind of get an impression of the depth of the shading that was in that one. Couldn't quite tell, but there also might have been a little impression of the kind of the deep red in the maple leaves.
Neat. Well,
Yeah.
Are we accessing like fairly new forms of thought for you?
Yeah, I don't do this at all, so that's pretty different.
That's awesome.
No problem. Yeah, I did have one kind of cool thing happen.
Oh, let's hear about it.
Well, I have a nerdy group of friends that are all trying to distract each other, and so they started Facebook Let's All Pretend We're at Hogwarts group, because we're nerds. And so I threw my name in thinking, well, I won't really be able to do much of this because I'm not very good at imagining and pretending, but at least I'll get to watch them have fun. So this morning we did a virtual plant walk on the Hogwarts ground.
Mm-hmm.
It was really interesting because I didn't necessarily see it, but I kind of had a spatial awareness of, okay, here's the edge of a forest, and here's the edge of the lake, and we're looking at this plant, and I can see the picture that's being posted, and that's a plant that I know in reality. So I can kind of get a sense of what is it like to be around that plant. And even kind of picking up things like, oh, hey, there could be a trail going off here. And
ooh, yeah.
Supposed to be the first year. Hell yeah, I'm walking down that trail and causing trouble. So, so that's not something that's normally in my realm.
Yeah.
So,
I would say the mental sense that seems like is developing the strongest for you is that spatial sense.
yeah, definitely.
And then you have these flashes of imagery that tend to come briefly.
Yeah, really briefly, but distinctly at this point. Oh, that must be visual, and then it's gone.
Yeah. That's really, really, really cool.
It is really cool.
See, and another interesting point here is she said how out of the norm it was for her. Yet on the post-training interview, she didn't really mention just how out of the norm a lot of the moments from the sessions actually were. It's nothing about her, obviously. It's the conscious mind defaulting back to what it's used to, like I just mentioned. And I'm curious, when this starts to happen for people, just how many minor breakthroughs throughout one's day, throughout one's week, may just be lost to memory. One other noteworthy byproduct of the sessions was, yet again, she experienced a vivid dream which was out of her norm. That's 3 out of the 4 participants who described a dream. Actually, was it 4 for 4? I can't remember if Bree mentioned a dream or not, but 3 for 3 for sure. So all in all, Catherine made huge progress in spatial reasoning or spatial processing in her thoughts. And she also had visual thoughts starting to kick in for her, which was out of her norm, albeit very brief kind of flashes of them. She left off the sessions feeling like there was light at the end of the tunnel and that she could start developing even further in her mind's eye.
She and her husband and myself were in the process of looking to buy our first houses. And so she's been engaging a lot in the fantasy of what do I want my house to look like? And I kind of just listen and chime in, well, I'd like these things, but I don't really think about it. And so she was describing the 2 houses that they'd been to see yesterday. And I found that I was actually kind of getting an impression of what it would be like to walk through them and how things might be laid out. And definitely spatial. I could kind of think about walking through. I wasn't necessarily getting what do the walls look like or what are colors in there, because I didn't know that. She wasn't telling me that. But it was kind of okay, so you walk in and there's a living room and a kitchen and a hallway and kind of being able to place the things she was talking about into a layout.
That's
which
really
would
cool.
have just been a blank where I'm oh yeah, okay, so it has those things. Yeah, I do see how if I don't continue regularly practicing, that it would kind of fade back to the pattern that it was before. So I think in terms of what do I want to do with it next, I think I need to be looking at how am I going to practice, because I don't think I really want to lose that again. And kind of one of those things where it's okay, this is a possibility. I don't know where it goes. I don't know what it looks like after. I feel like if I do follow it up, that there's some potential there for some really interesting shifts in how I think.
And with that wraps up the 4th participant in my case study. That was all the people that I worked with back in 2020. I hope you enjoyed their stories. Wild that it's 4 for 4 on the case study that experienced something new, albeit some more than others. But that's pretty typical. I think everybody's different. Just like learning an instrument, some people could maybe pick it up easier while others have to work a little harder at it. No different here. And the intention of the study was to show whether or not people could actually make progress in their mind's eye. Well, and here's the proof. You've heard it from their own mouth. Mission accomplished. So going forward, I'll say this. I'm kind of tired of doing these style of videos. I'm going to try to switch it up, so look forward to some new type of video content coming out pretty soon. Also, if you'd like me to cover any topics, feel free to comment down below. I'd love to get ideas from the people that are watching. And as usual, this is a YouTube video, so please like, comment, share, subscribe. That all helps me in what I'm doing here. And if you'd like to get a hold of me or watch the other videos from the case study, links all down in the description. All right, and that's it for today. I'll see you in the next one.